They once filled American kitchens with comfort, color, and quiet excitement, but today, they've almost vanished. Hidden in the pages of vintage cookbooks, these forgotten Betty Crocker recipes tell stories of family dinners, post-war creativity, and a time when every meal felt like an occasion. From creamy casseroles to unexpected flavor combinations, each dish carries a piece of history waiting to be rediscovered. Before they disappear completely, it's time to bring them back to life. Stay with us, because what you're about to see isn't just food, it's a taste of a past most people have already forgotten forever. The first forgotten recipe takes us back to a time when convenience was becoming a symbol of modern living, yet meals still carried a homemade soul. In the 1950s, kitchens across America welcomed a dish known as chicken dian. At first glance, it seemed simple: tender chicken layered over bright green broccoli, all covered in a rich, creamy sauce. But beneath that simplicity was a story of changing times. Families were beginning to rely on quick solutions like canned soups, yet they still craved warmth, comfort, and the feeling of a carefully prepared dinner. Chicken dian became a quiet star at family tables and small gatherings. It wasn't flashy, but it carried a sense of pride. The creamy sauce, often made with condensed soup, blended with melted cheese to create a texture that felt indulgent without being extravagant. Served bubbling hot from the oven, it filled homes with a smell that signaled the end of a long day and the comfort of sitting down together. What made this dish special wasn't just its taste, but its role in everyday life. It represented a bridge between tradition and convenience, where home cooks balanced time, budget, and care. Over the years, as fresh ingredients and fast food trends took over, chicken dian slowly faded into the background. Today, it remains tucked away in old recipe cards and fading cookbooks, waiting to be remembered. And perhaps that's what makes it so powerful, because it's not just a recipe. It's a reminder of evenings when the table mattered more than anything else, and a simple dish could bring everyone closer together. The second forgotten recipe comes from an era when presentation was just as important as taste, and nothing captured that better than the shimmering, curious world of gelatin molds. Among them was the now nearly vanished perfection salad, a dish that once proudly held its place on countless American tables. Suspended in a clear, gently quivering gelatin were finely shredded cabbage, carrots, and sometimes green peppers, creating a strange yet fascinating blend of textures. In the early 20th century, this dish symbolized progress. Refrigeration was becoming more common, and gelatin represented modern science entering the kitchen. To serve something molded, chilled, and visually striking was a sign of effort and sophistication. Families would gather around, admiring the glossy surface before slicing into it, revealing the suspended vegetables inside like a frozen moment in time. But beyond its unusual appearance, perfection salad told a deeper story. It reflected a period when cooks experimented boldly, unafraid to combine flavors and textures that might seem unexpected today. Vinegar added a sharp tang, balancing the subtle sweetness of the gelatin, while the vegetables provided a crisp contrast that made each bite strangely memorable. Over time, however, tastes began to change. The novelty wore off, and dishes like this were slowly replaced by fresher, simpler salads. What once felt innovative started to feel outdated, even puzzling to newer generations. Yet hidden in its history is a quiet charm. Perfection salad is more than just an unusual recipe, it's a snapshot of a moment when kitchens were evolving and creativity had no boundaries. It stands as a reminder of how far food culture has come, and how easily something once celebrated can slip into obscurity. The third forgotten recipe brings us into the heart of mid-century American dinners, where sweetness and savory flavors often shared the same plate without hesitation. Known as pineapple cheese casserole, this dish puzzled outsiders but delighted those who grew up with it. At its core were simple ingredients: canned pineapple chunks, sharp cheddar cheese, butter, and crushed crackers layered into a warm, golden bake that blurred the line between side dish and dessert. During the 1950s and 60s, Recipes like this reflected a sense of playful experimentation. Pineapple, once considered an exotic luxury, had become widely available in cans, making it a symbol of both convenience and subtle indulgence. Pairing it with cheese may seem unusual now, but at the time, it created a bold contrast that felt exciting and new. The sweetness of the fruit melted into the saltiness of the cheese, while the buttery cracker topping added a satisfying crunch. This casserole often appeared at holiday tables and church gatherings, where sharing something slightly unexpected made the meal feel special. It wasn't just about feeding people, it was about surprising them, creating conversations, and offering something they wouldn't forget. As decades passed, changing tastes began to favor clearer distinctions between sweet and savory dishes. Recipes that once thrived on contrast slowly lost their place, replaced by more predictable combinations. Yet pineapple cheese casserole remains a quiet reminder of a time when cooking was guided by curiosity rather than rules. It represents a willingness to take risks in the kitchen, to combine unlikely flavors, and to trust that something unusual could still feel like home. The fourth forgotten recipe takes us into a time when stretching ingredients was both a necessity and an art form. Known as mock apple pie, this dessert carried a surprising secret: there were no apples at all. Instead, crushed crackers, often buttery and plain, were transformed through sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of lemon into something that closely resembled the taste and texture of real apple pie. This recipe became especially popular during periods when fresh fruit was scarce or expensive. Families still longed for the familiar comfort of a warm pie cooling on the windowsill, and this clever substitute allowed them to recreate that experience without relying on seasonal ingredients. It was a quiet example of resourcefulness, where imagination filled the gaps left by limitation. When baked, the crackers softened and absorbed the syrupy mixture, taking on a tender, almost fruit-like consistency. The cinnamon and sugar wrapped everything in a familiar sweetness, while the lemon added just enough brightness to convince the senses that apples were truly there. To anyone tasting it for the first time, the illusion was both surprising and impressive. Mock apple pie often appeared at family gatherings, where it sparked curiosity and conversation. It wasn't just about saving money, it was about preserving tradition in a time when resources were uncertain. Over the years, as fresh ingredients became more accessible, the need for such substitutions faded. The recipe slowly disappeared, remembered mostly by those who experienced its quiet magic firsthand. Today, it stands as more than just a clever trick. It is a reflection of resilience, showing how even in times of limitation, people found ways to hold on to comfort, creativity, and the simple joy of sharing something warm from the oven. The fifth forgotten recipe leads us into a time when even the simplest ingredients could be transformed into something unexpectedly elegant. Known as tomato aspic, this dish once held a proud place on mid-century tables, especially during warm weather gatherings. Made from seasoned tomato juice set into a firm, chilled gelatin, it was often molded into decorative shapes and served with a touch of lettuce or a spoonful of mayonnaise. At a glance, tomato aspic felt refined. Its smooth, glossy surface and deep red color gave it a striking appearance that stood out among more traditional dishes. But its true story lies beneath that polished exterior. In an era when refrigeration was becoming more common, cold dishes like this represented modern convenience and a sense of culinary progress. Serving something chilled, structured, and visually precise showed care, effort, and a willingness to embrace new techniques. The flavor itself was a balance of savory and tangy. Vinegar, spices, and sometimes a hint of celery or onion gave the tomato base a sharp, refreshing edge. Each bite was cool and firm, offering a contrast to the warm, hearty meals it often accompanied. Tomato aspic was more than just a side dish. It was a conversation piece. Guests would admire its shape before tasting something that felt both familiar and unusual at the same time. As food trends shifted toward fresher and less structured dishes, recipes like this began to fade. The idea of turning vegetables into gelatin lost its appeal, and the once celebrated aspic quietly disappeared from everyday cooking. Yet it remains a symbol of its time, capturing a moment when presentation, innovation, and a touch of boldness defined what it meant to serve a memorable meal. The sixth forgotten recipe takes us into the comforting rhythm of weeknight dinners, where simplicity met satisfaction in a dish known as tuna noodle casserole. For many families in the 1950s and 60s, this wasn't just a meal, it was a dependable staple that appeared on tables when time was short but the need for warmth remained. Built from pantry essentials, the dish combined canned tuna, soft egg noodles, and a creamy sauce often made from condensed soup. Peas or small vegetables were sometimes added, bringing a touch of color to an otherwise humble creation. Topped with breadcrumbs or crushed chips and baked until golden, it emerged from the oven with a quiet promise of comfort. What made tuna noodle casserole so enduring was its practicality. It required little effort, stretched easily to feed a family, and relied on ingredients that could be stored for long periods. In an era when convenience foods were becoming more common, this dish perfectly balanced ease with the feeling of a home-cooked meal. But beyond its practicality, it carried an emotional weight. It was the kind of dinner served after long days, when families gathered without ceremony, simply grateful to share a moment together. The creamy texture and familiar flavors offered reassurance, a sense that even in busy times, something steady remained. As culinary trends evolved, dishes like this began to lose their place. Fresh ingredients, quicker alternatives, and changing tastes pushed casseroles into the background. Yet tuna noodle casserole still lingers in memory. It represents a time when meals didn't need to be impressive, they just needed to be enough. And in that simplicity, it found a lasting kind of comfort. The seventh forgotten recipe brings us into a time when even desserts carried a sense of spectacle, and few dishes captured that better than the curious charm of baked Alaska. At first glance, it seemed almost impossible, a frozen center of ice cream resting on soft sponge cake, all covered in a layer of meringue and briefly baked in a hot oven. The result was a dessert that arrived at the table both warm and cold, a contradiction that fascinated anyone who saw it. During the mid-20th century, baked Alaska became a symbol of culinary showmanship. It wasn't something made every day, but when it appeared, it turned an ordinary meal into an event. The golden peaks of meringue, lightly toasted and delicate, concealed the frozen interior, creating a sense of anticipation with every slice. What made this dessert so memorable was not just its taste, but the experience it created. Families and guests would gather closely, watching as it was cut open to reveal the hidden layers inside. The soft cake, cold ice cream, and airy meringue combined into a texture that felt both light and indulgent. Yet behind its elegance was a reminder of a time when home cooks were willing to attempt something ambitious, even with limited tools. It reflected patience, timing, and a desire to impress through effort rather than convenience. As years passed, desserts became simpler and quicker to prepare. The delicate balance required for baked Alaska made it less practical for everyday kitchens, and it slowly faded from common use. Today, it remains a quiet symbol of celebration, a dish that once transformed meals into memories, proving that sometimes food was meant to surprise as much as it was meant to satisfy. The eighth forgotten recipe takes us into the comforting, homey world of early American mid-century breakfasts and brunches, where ingenuity met everyday ingredients. Known as Swedish pancakes, this dish was delicate, thin, and slightly sweet, almost like crepes, but with a tender, buttery softness that made them uniquely satisfying. Unlike the towering stacks of American-style pancakes, these were light, rolled, or folded, and often served with lingonberry jam, a sprinkle of powdered sugar, or a drizzle of syrup. In the 1950s and 60s, Swedish pancakes reflected a growing fascination with international flavors, yet adapted to the ingredients readily available in American kitchens. Eggs, milk, flour, and butter were staples, making this dish accessible, but the presentation and subtle flavor elevated a simple breakfast into a small culinary delight. Families would gather on weekends, enjoying the ritual of pouring batter, flipping delicate pancakes, and watching them puff ever so slightly as they cooked. The charm of Swedish pancakes lay in their intimacy. Unlike more elaborate dishes, they encouraged conversation and interaction, as cooks and eaters shared the process together. Each bite carried a soft, comforting texture and a hint of sweetness that felt both indulgent and wholesome. They weren't just food, they were a moment of togetherness, a gentle start to the day. Over time, as quick-fix breakfasts and boxed mixes gained popularity, recipes like Swedish pancakes slowly disappeared from everyday tables. The labor of individually cooking thin pancakes seemed too time-consuming, and their subtle flavors were often overlooked in favor of bolder, faster alternatives. Yet revisiting them today reminds us of a quieter time when mornings were slower, ingredients simple, and food was crafted to nurture both body and spirit. Swedish pancakes remain a symbol of care, tradition, and the beauty in small, thoughtful gestures of cooking. The ninth forgotten recipe brings us into the world of mid-century comfort food that balanced indulgence with simplicity: Ambrosia salad. Often called a fruit salad with a twist, this dish combined canned fruit, miniature marshmallows, and shredded coconut, sometimes enriched with a touch of sour cream or whipped cream. It was colorful, sweet, and playful, appearing on holiday tables, potlucks, and church gatherings across America. Ambrosia salad tells a story of resourcefulness and creativity. In a time when fresh fruit was seasonal and often expensive, canned fruit allowed cooks to create something bright and cheerful year-round. The marshmallows and coconut added texture and whimsy, making the dish appealing to children and adults alike. It wasn't just a salad, it was a celebration of color, sweetness, and accessibility. The salad also reflects mid-century culinary trends, when the kitchen was a place of experimentation. People were eager to try new textures, mix unexpected ingredients, and present something visually striking. Ambrosia's floating layers of white, pink, and golden tones made it stand out among simpler desserts, a treat that invited curiosity before the first bite. Over the decades, tastes shifted. The era of boxed mixes, fast desserts, and fresh fruit preferences made Ambrosia's salad feel old-fashioned, even gimmicky. Its once-cherished charm gradually faded, leaving it mostly in the memory of those who grew up enjoying it at family events. Yet, Ambrosia salad remains a vivid reminder of a time when imagination, resourcefulness, and a touch of playfulness defined home cooking. Beneath the marshmallows and coconut lies a connection to a past where meals were more than nourishment. They were an experience, a moment of joy shared with family and friends. The 10th and final forgotten recipe takes us into the comforting, slightly indulgent world of mid-century American desserts with a dish called chocolate mayonnaise cake. At first, it sounds unusual, using mayonnaise in a cake? But during the 1940s and 50s, this ingenious shortcut transformed simple pantry ingredients into a moist, tender chocolate cake without butter or eggs. The mayonnaise, a blend of eggs and oil, created a richness that made every bite surprisingly decadent. Chocolate mayonnaise cake became a staple for home bakers who wanted impressive results with minimal fuss. It was perfect for birthdays, potlucks, or any time a chocolate craving struck. The cake's texture was soft yet slightly dense, with a subtle sweetness that paired beautifully with chocolate frosting, often spread thickly to make each slice feel indulgent. What made this cake special wasn't just convenience, it was a reflection of resilience and ingenuity. During wartime and post-war rationing, families had to make do with what they had, and recipes like this offered a way to create joy from scarcity. Serving this cake was a statement. You could produce something extraordinary even when ingredients were limited. Over the decades, as chocolate cakes became more standardized and butter-based recipes dominated, chocolate mayonnaise cake quietly slipped out of popular memory. Few modern cooks attempt it, unaware of the rich history behind its humble ingredients. Yet revisiting this recipe today is like opening a time capsule. It reminds us of a period when innovation and resourcefulness were celebrated, and simple meals could still bring families together. Chocolate mayonnaise cake isn't just dessert, it's a taste of ingenuity, nostalgia, and the quiet magic of mid-century American kitchens. As we close this journey through forgotten Betty Crocker recipes, we're reminded that food is more than flavor. It's memory, creativity, and a glimpse into everyday lives of the past. From quirky gelatin salads to clever chocolate cakes, each dish tells a story of resourcefulness, family gatherings, and culinary curiosity. These recipes may have faded from modern tables, but they remain treasures waiting to be rediscovered. So, the next time you open an old cookbook or raid your pantry, remember, history isn't just in books. Sometimes, it's on a plate, waiting for you to taste, share, and keep it alive.